welcome to the Billistics Lab. Today I'm going to be loading some 9mm ammo. If you want to go along with me on the process and see how I go about doing it, follow along. This is going to be a kind of real-time, unedited type video, seeing exactly what I go through. Let's just kind of talk about what we've got set up here. I already have my cases loaded in the Dillon case feeder. They've been cleaned. I've hit them with the Hornady one-shot, and I've allowed that to set up before putting them into the case feeder and dropping them down the tube. My powder today is going to be CFE pistol. I've already developed the load for this. I get about 1,030 feet per second from extreme 147 grain 9mm round nose bullets. And that is, of course, as I mentioned, over CFE pistol, 4.4 grains. My primer is going to be a CCI 500. I always label my assembly, my primer assembly, with the primer that's in it, just so that I never have amnesia. And if I ever have any spare primer magazines with spare primers in them, or maybe if I bulk loaded them in advance, I always put blue tape on them as well. I want to stay organized. Never want to get to a point in the future where I pick up a primer tube magazine and say, holy cow, there's primers in this. What are they? What do they belong to? Very difficult to operate like that. Okay, so my tool head, we've got a sizing and decapper at station 1. My powder hopper, station 2. Of course, priming station 2. Station 3 is blank. I do have a powder alarm. I use it sometimes if I'm going to do a large run. In this case, I'm just doing 50 to 100. I would use the primer alarm, but I'm doing small enough quantities that I'll be paying close attention. My seating die is set up for an overall cartridge length of 1.150 length. Now, there's always some variation in the length of the projectile as measured against, when it's seated as measured against the ogive, and therefore there's going to be some fluctuation on that. I see maybe about plus or minus 0.003 of an inch, but that's roughly what we're shooting for. I have a crimping die at station number 5. The crimp is just a light crimp. If I were to do one with just the projectile and the cartridge at station 5, when I go to bring the handle down, I'll feel it tugging a little bit. That's not the true measurement of a light crimp, but I'm just saying it's not stuck up in there that takes a lot of force. It also isn't such that when I move the handle, you wonder whether or not it even engaged. All right, I have a I have a case feed stop plugged in over here so that when I operate the handle, no cases are dropping. I do that for when I'm setting up my powder drop. I want to make sure that it weighs correctly. Often I'll also use a primer stop. So in this case, it's not dropping cases. It's also not allowing the powder bar to fully go under the shell plate. I have a 9mm case that I've marked up with a red Sharpie, so I know that it's a dummy. I also have inserted a primer into it upside down. That's so that when I'm measuring powder, that there's a lesser chance of the powder getting stuck in the flash hole and then giving me erroneous readings. So we're going to go ahead and drop that into station 2. We're going to dump some powder into it. I should be about 4.4, 4.5. And behind the camera, I have A&D FX120I scale. Okay, so the scale was not properly zeroed, so I zeroed it by putting the cartridge on the scale platen and zeroing it, and I'm always going to use just this cartridge. Now I'll go ahead and drop some powder into it. And right smack at 4.4. So I know that I'm good there, but I always like to double check. So I'm going to go ahead and drop it a second time. And I'll weigh this one as well. 4.4. Now, to be absolutely certain, after I empty the powder from that, I'm going to put the empty case back on the platen, and sure enough, it weighs 0.0 grains. So I know I'm now ready to start dropping powder. So to do that, I'm going to pull the handle back. I'm going to get my cover on my powder dispenser. I'm going to remove my primer stop and store it. I'm going to remove my case feeder stop. Easier said than done. Sometimes it gets stuck in there. Okay, and when this comes down, I'm going to put my locator pin back in, and we're ready to go right now. So just decapped that case. It just seated a primer, dropped powder, and for you guys who have the XL750, you know that pushing the handle forward is the critical step here to seat your primer. And what I've gotten into the habit of doing is, no matter where I'm at in the process, wherever I stop, I'm always making sure that I push the handle forward, and whenever I start, I'm pushing the handle forward. In other words, I always want to make sure that there's a primer seated in the case. Now I'm going to catch this one as it comes down the chute. And I'm going to grab my micrometers and give it a measurement. And I'm at 1.147 and a half thousandths, or I should say 10 thousandths. So that's a good cartridge. I also have a case gauge here. So we're going to plunk it into the case gauge, plunks real nicely, fits, comes in and out, and we're good to go. So let's get this production rolling. You saw what I just did. I forgot to put a pew pellet in there. No problem. There's an easy fix to that. We're just going to pull it out, powder and all. We'll catch up with that one later. That's what happens with distractions and breaking the process or breaking the rhythm. Now, one thing you want to be real careful of is that when you have sized or seated in either case, if things are stuck, like right here, I want to raise the handle, but the piece of brass that just filled with powder at station 2 is stuck on the funnel flaring portion. And when I go to pull it down, I don't want to do it so forcefully that I'm jerking powder out of it. So it's one of those things that you just kind of learn the machine as you go along. Okay, here's a good example. In this case, the primer isn't seating. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this out and inspect it and just make sure, yep, indeed, the primer did get decapped from that. So that's not the problem. It's not like it's stuck in the bottom of it. So a lot of times if I just spin it a little bit, it'll line up better with the primer that's in the cup, and that's exactly what happened. So we're good to go on that one. Okay, now I want to check my powder dispenser just to make sure we're tracking. So on the downstroke with everything, the ram up, I'm going to take my case feed stop and drop it in so that it stops feeding cases. I'm going to clear out all the cases that are still on the shell plate. So let's just go ahead and load these. And while I'm doing this, I'm keeping an eye on the powder in the case. I'm seeing it as it goes around, just making sure that there is powder. Okay, so we're all clear. I'm going to double check my powder dispenser again, just make sure I'm still getting the 4.4 or 4.4-ish that I'm looking for. Let me just go over to the scale. That one's 4.46, which is acceptable, but I like to double check. So, I'm going to drop one more. .36. So that's an acceptable range. That's kind of what I expect to get out of this. So we're back into production now. I'm going to put my pin back in. And you might be wondering, how often do I actually bother to stop the production and check the powder? And the answer is really not that often. I'll usually go about this much, about a third to a half of powder before I'll bother to refill, and at that point I'll go ahead and check. And that could be hundreds of rounds. Now remember, we had a case that I accidentally had it skip the seating station, so I went ahead and put it in at station 2. Of course I can't prime it, it's already primed. It already has powder in it, so I don't want to go all the way up. So I'm just going to take it up enough that it rotates past there. And we're back into production now. Here we have brass at station 1. I got my bullet seated at station 4. Another video, it's out on Facebook as well as YouTube, about the primer assembly and the little peephole that I cut in here that allows you to see the workings of the primer mechanism. Now you can see mine's dialed in. It's working great. Primers are exactly where they need to be. Nothing's landing on the floor. I'm not having any that are not getting picked up. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Now, I had started this job prior to starting the video. I'm actually at 85 loaded rounds right now. I have a counter. Hopefully this is in the video. I have a counter up here that shows me how many rounds. So I'm shooting for 100. So we've got about, so I'm at 89. So stick with me. And when I'm at 94, I'm going to put my case feed stop back in. And by doing that, the final 6 rounds that I need will be cleared out of the machine. And that way I won't have any left on the shell plate. Okay, there I am at 94. So I'm gonna bring it up, plug in my case feed stop, and this will finish me up at 100. $99, 100. There we go. So that's the process. Let me move the camera angle. I'll point out something. All right, so on this side of the machine, just give you a view of some things going on. We talked about the case feeder, the case counter, and that's all attached to my chute, which A similar design was available on the internet. The problem was that the counter was right here and the case didn't have enough velocity to always trigger the flap. So by adding this chute to my design, what I end up is getting enough velocity of this coming down that it always triggers that. Works really well with pistol rounds. Rifle rounds are a little trickier. That's to be expected just because of the nature of the long pointed bullet sometimes gets stuck into the flap or just tumbles in here and gets caught at a, see if I have a rifle round, here we go. There's a dummy 223 round. Sometimes it'll get stuck like that. Actually, that's a 300 blackout round. All right, there we go. That's how I load 9mm ammo. Hopefully you picked up a tip there.